talk in the series entitled The Hidden Treasure, presented by Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society Asia Pacific, part of Monash University's program Ibn Arabi Initiatives. Our speaker tonight is Jane Clark, Senior Research Fellow of Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society UK. At present, amongst other things, she's working on a translation of Fusus al-Hikam by Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, along with two other colleagues. Her talk tonight is entitled Ibn Arabi on the Idea of Perpetual Progress. Jane's very kindly agreed to respond to queries at the end of her talk. So if you do have a query arising during her talk, go to your chat facility and press the raised hand option. And then after her talk, you'll be unmuted and you'll be able to ask Jane your question. Without further ado, Jane, it's a great pleasure to welcome you. Welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us tonight, or wherever you are. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to the first series of this very exciting initiative at Monash. And hello to all friends and colleagues, if I haven't managed to wave to you as you come in. I'm going to share the screen. And so I don't know how you'll see me, but you're going to mostly see the PowerPoint throughout this talk. So my talk is on Ibn Arabi's, on the idea of perpetual progress. And it's really basically a commentary upon a phrase in the chapter in Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam, in the wisdom of the heart, in the Schweib word, which is this little passage. It is one of the most extraordinary things that human beings are in perpetual progress, but they are unaware of it because of the subtlety and delicacy of the veils and the similarity of forms to one another. My interest in the passage has been inspired by the work I've been doing over the last few months on a collection of talks by the late Dom Sylvester Huidard, whose talks I'm editing, and we hope the book, which we entitled The Kiss, will be published early in 2021. And for those of you who don't know Dom Sylvester, he was a founder member of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society and gave several talks at the early symposia in the UK, US and Spain. He was an extraordinary man. He was a Benedictine monk who was ordained in his 20s. He was also a poet, a concrete poet, who participated in the London avant-garde scene of the 60s and 70s, presenting his work alongside figures like Allen Ginsberg and Yoko Ono and John Cage. And he was also a great scholar, steeped in the mystical tradition of Christianity, and was an expert on the writings of the early desert fathers like Gregory of Nyssa, fathers, and the great medieval thinkers Thomas Aquinas and Meister Eckhart. But at the same time, he was engaged and very actively engaged with the study of Tibetan Buddhism and of Ibn Arabi. And the talks that he gave towards the end of his life brought together these three traditions into a coherent and extraordinary synthesis. So it seemed to me that a talk based around his work would be very appropriate in this first series of talks under the auspices of this department, which I understand is called the Ibn Arabi Interreligious Research Initiatives. So Sir Dom Sylvester sees this process of perpetual progress in Ibn Arabi as being equivalent to the concept of epectasy in the Christian mystical tradition. And this talk is, basically an exploration of this correlation, which I believe to be a true one, And one of the points is to demonstrate the extraordinarily close correlation between these two traditions when we are talking about our essential existential situation. Apectasy in Greek means leaning or straining forward. Oh, now what's happened? Okay, great. Gregory of Nyssa described it. He says, in generally, apectasy as advancing towards a goal, and perfection of advance consists in reaching that goal and coming to a halt. In the spiritual life, however, in the search for God, since the goal is that which cannot be reached, perfection of seeking consists not in ceasing to advance, but in never ceasing to advance. And we could look at this. This is not a good diagram, but this is of an asymptote, which is a mathematical formula. And there's this sort of mathematical phenomena where this line gets closer and closer to x equals 2, but in fact, it never actually reaches it. In Arabic, the words that Ibn Arabi uses for perpetual progress are al-taraki al-da'iman. So the word for progress, tarakin, comes from the verb rakia, which means to ascend, to rise, to advance, to progress. And it's relatively straightforward in terms of translation. The word for perpetual means da'iman. It's a common adjective. It's usually translated in modern Arabic simply as always. It has a lot of meanings, including endless, eternal, perpetual, continuous, unceasing, but it also has a range of meanings which are kind of, the Arabic verbs nearly always have their own meaning and their opposite meaning. So it can also mean permanent or standing, or the word dharma, the root verb dharma, can have meanings to persevere, to move in a circle, to turn, spin, or revolve, and even to stand still or to stagnate. We're going to talk first of all about the idea of progress. So Ibn Arabi talks about human progress in many different ways in his work. He uses the standard Islamic framework, for instance, in which this human emergence begins at a certain time in creation with the first human being, Adam, and advances through a series of stages marked the emergence of the prophets to the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad, then onwards to the second coming of Christ, and finally to a point where human beings will no longer inhabit this earth. This will not be at the end of their advancement, however, as he states in the chapter of Adam in the Fusus al-Hikam, that they will then be transferred to the next world where people will continue to develop and learn. In terms of each human life, he likewise presents a scenario in which we come into this earth in order to gain knowledge and to come closer to God, and tells us that this process will continue in the next world after we die. And this is, in fact, the immediate context of the passage that we're discussing. The preceding lines are, we have discussed the way that progress in the divine sciences happens after death in our book of Theophanies, where we have mentioned our meeting with certain Sufis behind the veil and how we taught them what they did not already know about these matters. But today, I want to talk about this matter, the matter of progress at what we might call an essential level, the level of the deepest underlying reality of things. And this is a hidden level, which might have little or no immediate correlation with what we might call progress in an external sense, either culturally or personally. Although I think it's important not to completely dissociate these two levels. In the modern day, we have a very good example of the world behaving differently at different, or seeming to behave differently at different levels of existence in physics, where there are rules and principles which appertain to our ordinary everyday world, where matter seems solid and stable. And then at the quantum level, we have different rules and principles, and matter as a solid reality becomes elusive. This idea of there being different levels of understanding, each valid in their own way, is stated clearly within Buddhism in what Dom Sylvester often refers to as the two truths, the conventional truth that things are as they seem to be, and the ultimate truth that in reality things are empty of sunyata or inherent existence. And we are going to be talking at the ultimate truth level in this talk today. Parallel with physics is interesting because, as many people have pointed out, just how similar the findings of 20th century physics are to the insights of the mystical traditions. And certainly this idea of things being empty of real existence is borne out by experiments in the great particle accelerators in places like CERN, where physicists are investigating the fundamentals of matter. It was expected that they would find some basic particle or building block from which all that we see around us is ultimately made. But instead we have an ever-changing kaleidoscope of particles appearing from nowhere and disappearing to nowhere. So this is one of the collision patterns from CERN. Even the famous Higgs boson was which was heralded a few years ago as being a final piece in the array of fundamental particles. I learned recently from a University of Oxford bulletin has now been split into two more things called muons. So even hard-nosed physicists, all this is now seriously undermining the assumptions of materialism, which has been a foundational principle of modern science. And people talk much more now about energy and process, but when they do about matter in a traditional sense. And these findings fit very well with Ibn Arabi's understanding of what is happening at essential level, and in particular his theory of what is referred to as continuous creation. Well, I say his view, but this was actually the accepted theological view within medieval Islamic culture. In this understanding, the creation of the universe and all that is in it may seem to have happened in the past when we think about it at a macro level. And so these days you would say that this took place for the universe 13.8 billion years ago in a big bang. But at a micro level, the world is in fact continually being brought into being, renewed by the real at every moment, in this moment, in the now. And this is a major feature of Ibn Arabi's vision, and it is a major theme in particular of the wisdom of Schweib, where he says shortly after the passage that we are discussing, how beautiful is God's saying about the world and how it is transmuted with each breath into a new creation within a single entity. He says about one group, which in fact includes most people in the world, that they are confused about a new creation. They do not recognize the way the creative command is renewed in every breath. So the creative command here is kun, be, as in the Quranic verse, when the real wills a thing, he says to it be and it becomes. And when he says transmuted in every breath within a single entity, this is his understanding that everything that exists in the manifestation, everything that exists is the manifestation or expression of a single Ein or essence, and that the bewildering diversity and multiplicity of what we see at both micro and macro levels is all taking place within a unified framework, Wahdat al-Wujud. This is something that most of the physicists do not seem to have realized, and so we must place them in the ranks of those who are confused. They think they are looking at many independent or existing things and cannot see the underlying ground of unity which gives coherence to the phenomena. But Ibn Arabi and his fellow mystics are not confused because they understand that this continual bringing into being of the world is essentially a process by which one essence is revealing himself, according to the Hadith Qudsi, without which no talk of Ibn Arabi would ever be complete, and which I note gives this series of talks its title. I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known. Therefore I created the world that I might be known. In the last paragraph of Schweib, Ibn Arabi puts the matter like this. The people of unveiling, on the other hand from those who are confused, see that God reveals himself in every breath, and that the revelation is never repeated. They also see by direct witnessing that every revelation brings a new creation and takes away a creation. Therefore, its being taken away is annihilation, fana, at the moment of revelation, while continuation, baka, is due to what the next revelation brings. So here we come across the term revelation, which in Arabic tajali is it tajali, which comes from the root jala, which has the meaning to appear or to make clear or to polish, but it also means to shine, to be brilliant, to be luminous. It makes clear, as does the hidden treasure analogy, that we are talking about something beautiful and glorious here. It is not just a dry metaphysic. And as Ibn Arabi intimates, opens up the possibility, this glorious revelation can be witnessed by people directly, by people of real knowledge, the Ali Kashf, the people of insight or unveiling, who can see beyond the ordinary everyday macro world to what lies beneath it without the aid of huge pieces of technology like colliders or telescopes which see far out into the universe. So in the chapter on Shwaib, Ibn Arabi says that this direct witnessing takes place not via the intellect or the senses, which are the organs that we usually use to perceive and understand the world, but by what he calls the heart, qalb in Arabic, which within Islamic thought is a specific organ through which we can directly witness the tajalliyat of the real. Ibn Arabi explains at some length the difference between the perception of the heart and that of the intellect. The intellect needs to fix things into forms and patterns and is too slow and cumbersome to adapt to each new creation as it arrives. Whereas the heart has the ability to move flexibly and adapt to the form of each tajalli as it appears moment by moment. And the root word kalb actually comes from a root meaning turn. And it is this, rather than the activities of love, which we usually associate with the heart in our Western tradition, that it is its essential characteristic. It is fluid enough, and Ibn Arabi uses the term variable to turn towards the influx of light, which is the new tajalli, constantly relinquishing its attachment to the previous state. And similarly, the senses do not have the capacity to perceive the tajalliyat as they appear. Their mode of perception, or at least their ordinary mode of perception, is tuned to the macro world, and they are not sufficiently subtle to see the ever-changing manifestations of the micro world. In fact, you could say they are the veil which covers it over. Thus, Eric Winkle, working from his deep knowledge of Ibn Arabi's great masterwork and the revelations of Mecca, makes an analogy of this process in 35mm film. The film is made up of individual static frames, but when they go over a certain speed, we begin to see them as a continuous story and fail to see their discrete nature. And just in the quantum nature of electrons movement is not discernible when we see masses of them flowing through a metal as an electric current. It looks like to us like a continuous flow. So this emphasis upon the heart indicates that this knowledge of the ultimate nature of things gained by the Alif Kashf is achieved through contemplation, through looking to the interior rather than the exterior of things. As Dom Sylvester constantly points out, the most accessible and easy way for us to investigate the nature of reality and creation is to investigate ourselves, because we are created beings in the world. And whilst we do not have access to the interiors of other things like atoms and stars, or other beings like plants and animals, we do have access to our own interior because we have consciousness. But in order to do this, we need to withdraw from the modes of perception which are tuned to the macro world. meaning that we need to still the constant influx of thought and sensory perceptions which flood us all the time. Dom Sylvester's correlations with the terminology of other traditions is interesting here. For him, the equivalent of the Islamic heart in the Christian tradition, he calls heart of mind, not mind, but the ground from which mind arises. Or he uses most commonly the term apex mentis, the highest point of mind, which he describes as the mere luminous possibility of having concepts and names. And he quotes Eckhart, who says that apex mentis apprehends God in his wardrobe, which sounds comical to us now. But what he means by wardrobe, he means the place where God is divested of the words, names, and concepts with which we normally clothe him. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the equivalent is Sen's Nid, naked mind, mind when it is again stripped of all its thoughts and attributes, or single pointedness of mind. These are places which can only be discovered by coming to a point of stillness and silence in the interior. Just as to see the individual frames of a film, we have to slow it right down, or quieten it right down, or however we want to think about it. And so thinking about stillness and motion brings us to considering the notion of time and perpetuity. In Schweib, Ibn Arabi talks about this new creation as happening in every breath, which chimes nicely with contemplative practice, where the most basic technique is to concentrate upon the breath. And the breath, of course, reiterates the whole creative process which he describes of receiving sustenance and relinquishing it. And more importantly, it is inexorable, perpetual, and it never ceases as long as we are alive. But if we look at the last quote, we can see that actually things come into being and go out of being simultaneously. There is actually no interval of time between the two events. So breath here needs to be read symbolically rather than literally. Similarly, commenting on the Futuhat upon the Quranic verse, every day he is engaged with a business, Shan, which is the main source text for the idea of continuation within the Islamic tradition. Ibn Arabi points out that the term day is also symbolic. Some days, he says, are long and some are short. But, he says, although the days are diverse in their length and in their correspondence with solar days, God's command within them, the command be, is like the twinkling of an eye, and it is perhaps even shorter, its duration being the conjectured indivisible moment, which is the day of the business. So this individual moment, which is sometimes referred to also as the instant, al-an, is this point between the past and the future, which has no real duration or existence. And this is why Ibn Arabi calls it mutawaham, conjectured. As for the business that takes place within this day, he says in another part of the Futuhat, this business is the states, ahwal, of the created things who are the place of manifestation for the existence of this business within them, since it is within them that he creates this business perpetually. And so this, clearly, we're going back, I was a hidden treasure. This is the business of the constant revelation. And here, Ibn Arabi used perpetually, here's daiman again. This is the same word. So what he's saying is that within this individual moment that we exist in, or you could say that we experience, we exist or we experience a state, hal, which is just a way of saying that this is how we are. And he explains more about this moment later in the Futuhat, in the Manazil section on the time of the being. And he says about this instant, here it's on, the instant, although it is a time, is a limit or boundary for what has passed in time and what is to come in time. It is like a point inscribed on the circumference of a circle through which a beginning and an end are designated. So in reality, he's saying there is no beginning and no end, no first but no last, that there is perpetuity. So here is the image that he presents himself with. So he's saying that there is always a circle with a circumference, because as the ongoing Mias UK series, the geometry of reality has drawn out very clearly, the circumference is the extension into manifestation of the dimensionless point, the center, which is the one reality. As long as the real is in manifestation, according to the hidden treasure hadith, there is a circumference. And we can imagine that we in this present moment, the now, are like a dot placed upon it. But the important thing to realize is that before this dot of manifestation is placed, there is no beginning or end designated to the line of the circumference. There is just the circumference, that is perpetuity, or there is just circumferenceness here. That is perpetuity. The principle of the process of manifestation goes on unceasingly. Thus Ibn Arabi goes on. The world never ceases to be under the determination of the time of the state, and the determination of God in the world never ceases to be in the determination in that time. So that which is past and future in it never ceases to be under the determination of the time of the state. In other words, what we think of past and present, like the beginning and end created by the dot on the circumference, are determined by the present moment, by the individual moment and the state of the indivisible moment, not vice versa. And so this indivisible moment in time is not in time as we usually understand it. It is indivisible and irreducible, which means that it cannot be subdivided. So it is often referred to as the timeless moment or the eternal now, because there cannot be any movement within it. Movement depends upon time. And so a perception of movement depends on time. And Dom Sylvester brings in many sayings by the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart on this particular matter, making it clear, I think, that he is very much at one with Ibn Arabi here. For instance, Meister Eckhart in his talk, in Dom Sylvester's talk, Time and Non-Time, says, in the oneness of this eternal now, all the works of God are always produced now. Although in the indivisible moment we touch upon eternity and all creation happens in it, we cannot persist there. As Ibn Arabi goes on his commentary upon the Quranic verse, every day he is engaged in a business, he points out, no state can remain for 2 moments, since were it to remain for 2 moments, the real would not be the creator of the thing in which the state remained. It would not be poor towards God and would be qualified with independence from him. And this is not possible. And so here we have a clear statement about what the Buddhists mean by sunyata, or the fact that created things are empty of inherent existence. So now I'm going to present a passage from Dom Sylvester's own word, which sums up, I think, all that we've said so far. Dom Sylvester, usually the first step in meditation, in mind stilling, is to become aware for ourselves that the very instant will be becomes am, is the very instant that am becomes was and is annihilated into the past. This is what Ibn Arabi found difficult to explain to people. I have no idea where he got that from. The only ego we can ever seize is seized not by awareness, and this is important. This is this capacity of the mind beyond thought, by awareness, by splitting mind into subject, knowing mind, and an object. At the point of awareness, however, at apex mentis or whatever, mind simply is. But this static point of awareness of the point of mind lasts for 0 time, and is the identical static point that annihilates is into is not. The isness can last only 0 time, and so is annihilated instantaneously. This is the meaning of our poverty, nothingness, lowliness, humility, and emptiness. This is the nature of all reality, but only human beings can be aware of it so far as we know. But it is true of everything that exists. The now of the table, the now of the carpet, of the tree, the star, of everything. The now is always instantaneous, and everything has its own history. And then the punchline: what we are is beings, not beings, but becomings. So here, by becomings, he means we are not things, we are processes through which creation is constantly coming into being. Okay. So, having laid this ground, perpetual progress. So what we've said so far establishes that what is happening to us at a micro level, perpetually, da'iman, is that we are brought into the world, or we could see it as Gregory Nyssa did, that we are perpetually in movement towards God. But why should we see this process of continuous creation? Why should Ibn Arabi call it progress, advancement, or even ascent? And this, of course, is Dante and Beatrice ascending to paradise. So I just want to give a couple of reasons, and perhaps in the discussion, people might come up with more. So firstly, there is something that we have not yet discussed, which was mentioned in the passages I brought from Schweib. So he says, the people of unveiling see that God reveals himself in every breath, and that the revelation is never repeated. And this non-repetition, the takriya of the reality of the tajali, is a very central principle in Sufi metaphysics. The real never appears in the same way twice. So when Ibn Arabi talks about a new creation, he really means it. The new tajali, the new revelation that comes from God in every breath, brings something that has never previously been revealed. It is a fresh manifestation of beauty, which is essentially untainted by anything from the past. And so it is intrinsically an advancement, an addition to the beauty of creation. But we also saw in another passage from Schweib, in fact, the first one where we picked up this idea of perpetual progress, that most of us do not actually witness this. He says, it is one of the most extraordinary things that human beings are in perpetual progress, but they are unaware of it because of the subtlety and delicacy of the veils and the similarity of the forms to one another. That is, we are taken in by the fact that things appear in ways that are only very subtly different from other things. And we, with our gross faculties and our rationalizing intellects, lump them all together as if they were the same. So we do not see this constant advancement in beauty. For instance, we take, I have learned, 20,000 breaths every single day, and every single one of them is different. One of the practices of meditation, as I'm sure many of you will know, is to try to become aware of this and to see how each one has its own quality. But this requires the cultivation of a subtle vision. Secondly, Ibn Arabi's view gives us a radically different understanding of time. Our usual understanding is that we are on a linear path where the past becomes the present, which becomes the future. In other words, we feel that we are conditioned or determined by what has already happened in the past. But as I hope my exposition has been clear enough to demonstrate, this is not how it is at the level of reality. As receptive loci, who are constantly brought into being by the revelation of the real, we always face necessarily towards the future. As we have seen in Dom's exposition, both in Ibn Arabi and in the Christian mysticism, the process in one is which the future will be, becomes the present, which then becomes the past. In other words, just to reiterate, as Ibn Arabi says, the present moment designates and dictates both the future and the past. And to face, but we are facing always towards the future. And to face towards the future is to constantly, perpetually face towards the infinite possibility, which is the one reality. And this is the very essence of hope and of progress. And in Ibn Arabi's exposition, of course, it is also to face towards compassion, because we know that it is through compassion that the relative possibilities who long for expression, that the creative command kun, be, comes about in the first place. So just to return to epectasy, where we began, this is defined as being the perpetual movement towards the real, who is seen as forever unattainable. Thus, there is no end to the journey. But this, like our perception of time, is just how we see it. But the situation from all that we have said is clearly that in truth, the reality of the situation that he, God, the real, is in reality forever advancing towards us. It is not that he is constantly removing himself from us, but rather that he ceaselessly comes close to us, if only we can see it. And this is, without doubt, perpetual progress. So that's, don't know how the time is. That's the end of my exposition. Sorry, I meant to finish with this. Yeah. Okay.